Hi guys, welcome to my presentation about my research this semester, which was on using a random forest to predict the Etsy average rating. So an introduction to Etsy. Etsy is, you guys might have heard of it. It's basically an online marketplace for small shops and creators. So it's similar in some ways to like Amazon, but it's geared more towards individuals trying to sell stuff, usually out of their own home or very, very small businesses. A lot of it's like homemade goods, like crafts. I used to have an Etsy shop where I was selling some like little custom chalk bags for climbers. So stuff like that. There's a little screenshot there on the right where I show like if you search for embroidery on Etsy, a bunch of shops come up for like embroidered pillows and stuff like that. So yeah, it's a little bit more like homemade and niche than something like Amazon. These shops are very customizable and configurable, so you can really change a lot of things about your shop so that when people go to it, it's sort of drawing in a certain audience. You can have like kind of a theme that you develop, and so there's a lot of different kind of things that you can tweak. So for shop reviews, similar to other online retailers, shops can have an average rating between 1 and 5 stars, which is just obviously the average of all the reviews that they've gotten. So maybe not every sale that they make, there'll be a review submitted for it, but of the ones they've gotten, it'll show up on the shop. You can see there at the bottom, it shows right as you're even looking at the shop or even in search results, it shows what the average review is. And I'm not sure what the exact Etsy algorithm is, but it definitely, if you search for any kind of category, shops with higher reviews are going to show up first. So it definitely has a factor on whether the shop will be what's called indexed or start showing up in search results. So rating or like review these average stars has been shown. There was a study that I read, which at the end I'll have like a references slide so you can look at it too if you're interested. But it has been shown to be a very important factor, especially among young people when people are deciding what shops to click on and what stuff to buy. Their young people in particular are a lot more likely to look at that average review, and it'll help filter out whether or not they're actually going to buy something. So my question that I had that I wanted to answer was, if I'm a small Etsy shop owner, what can I change about my shop to get the best possible average review, which in turn could correlate to my shop showing up in search results and probably into more sales. So previous work has been done in this area. I will say that the first two in this list actually were done by Etsy researchers. So I thought that was kind of interesting that a lot of the Etsy related research had been done by Etsy researchers, which could mean that it had sort of a bias towards Etsy, which takes, obviously it's a company, so they take a cut of profits from their sellers. So, but not a lot of research has been done from like an outside or like the seller perspective, I guess you could say. So that's another reason I wanted to do some research in this area as someone who does not work at Etsy. But there was still some cool stuff done. So the first paper I have listed there is about shop style and how it relates to how many sales, and also just like how well the shop is doing. So these researchers were looking into, they came up with a metric called shop style, which I thought was interesting. They basically took a bunch of things about the store, so like the look and feel of the shop, some of the pictures, they did some image analysis. They looked at like the text of the description, and they came out with like, I think it was 38 distinct styles, and they were words like farmhouse or cute or cosmic, things like that. And they were looking at like shops that had a very strong sense of style versus shops that didn't really have or had sort of a random sense of style, or it couldn't be classified that well using their neural network. And they looked at like how much that correlated to sales success, and they found that it did have a strong correlation. So the second paper that I want to talk a little bit about had to do with click-through rate and how it related to certain shop features for promoted listings. And this was also done by researchers at Etsy. So this was specifically for promoted listings, which basically what that means is that a seller can pay money to have their listing appear higher in the search results. And click-through rate is a commonly used metric to see how well an ad, or in this case, a promoted listing, is performing. So that's for the number of people that your ad or your listing is shown to, how many people actually then click on that. So they looked at various different shop features, and they did find that there was a correlation between click-through rate and shop features. So they're using similar inputs to me, that is in shop features, but they had a different target, which was the click-through rate, and they were only looking at this small subset of shops, which are promoted listings, which again, Etsy researchers, they want more people to spend money for promoted listings, so it makes sense. So then the next one was not actually done by Etsy researchers. and they were looking into narrative conventionality and how, and also that corresponding again to items sold. So narrative conventionality, it basically just means within a category, the descriptions, you might have some like similar language between the descriptions, or things that when you're searching for an item, you unconsciously kind of words come to mind that you might search for. And so they were looking at if a shop has what they consider like a high rating of narrative conventionality within a category. So like how similar is it to its neighbors in the same category? Does that help, or does that correspond to more sales? And they found that it actually does have a correlation. So that was another interesting one, slightly different from what I'm doing. So next I'm going to talk a little bit about data collection. So for this, I used Etsy's public API, which is available and you can go look at. And I will say that the API was not really designed for what I was doing, which was getting a large amount of data, like a bunch of different shop data. And so they have it so that you can only search one shop at a time by ID. But I found out that the ID is basically just an integer that's between, I think it starts around like 10 million and then it goes up to like around 30 million, and it's just kind of incremented. So what I did was I basically just randomly generated a big sequence of these IDs and then would just kind of call the API to go try to get the shop and see if it existed. And if it didn't, I would just move on to the next ID. And I did that, I think, for like 5 nights in a row. I did have a limit on how many requests I could make per day with my API key. Yeah, so the endpoints I used were over on the left. So the first one was that get shops, and this was just kind of some basic shop settings and metrics. The next one was for the shops that I found that were useful, I got the listings, so I could get more information specifically about their listings. And then I also would get if it was a good, good quality data, I would get the about, which is like the shop story, which is kind of like the background of why the shop was created and some more information about the seller. So for the data set, I ended up getting around 50,000 shops over a few days. Unfortunately, of those that I retrieved, only about 5,000 had reviews. So obviously only the ones with reviews are going to be useful for my research because I'm doing research about reviews. And so it looked like there was a lot of shops that had just been created, but there was no reviews for it. So out of the 5,000 with reviews, about 2,800 were active, which means that they're still selling things, had active listings, which ended up being important for my my target that I ended up calculating. So my target, so this is kind of like the Y of my supervised model that I'm trying to predict. I ended up doing average stars per month, which is the average rating. So that's like, of all the reviews, what's the average rating times the number of ratings. So this is kind of how many stars has the shop gotten total divided by the amount of months that the shop has been active. So I wanted to do this to prevent the data being skewed high for shops that had only been around for a little while. So if your shop's only been around for 1 month and you only have one review and it's 5 stars, then those shops were being obviously had a really, really high average rating, whereas like a shop that's been around for 10 years and has 10,000 reviews and only has like, a rating of 4.5 or like an average rating, which is still really good, but that would show up lower, even though that shop is like objectively, they've probably made more money and are more successful. So I wanted to kind of like weight the average reviews a little bit by doing it as a rate as opposed to just using the flat average rating. This is just kind of the distribution of my average stars per month. So obviously you see there's a bunch that are kind of down there pretty low. And so this is like shops that are only getting, between 0 and 10 average stars per month, all the way up to, there's another little peak like way far up there. So it seemed like as a shop started to kind of gain momentum, it would kind of explode. So it would go from like this, the vast majority of shops that were kind of getting, this in this little like normal distribution peak that we have down at the on the left of the chart. And then if the shop kind of exploded with popularity, you'd end up seeing like a huge jump. And so these were the features that I got, and I've highlighted a few of them as ones that I thought were particularly interesting, that I was interested to see if they actually had any kind of impact. And this is all stuff that the seller has some control over. And so there's a bunch of different stuff, obviously, and I was basically trying to find out, of all the stuff, what are maybe the 5 most important features when it comes to stuff that you can control about your shop that you could change. So I want to give a quick overview of the random forest algorithm just for people that haven't heard of it. Random forest is an ensemble. So that means that you're using a bunch of different models as opposed to just like one single model. In this case, we're using decision trees, which are really easy to understand. Basically, you're just using your features to split data. You're splitting up your data set along these features and then trying to get the biggest, like the best split possible. So like the purity of the split at each node, and you're building out a tree. So random forest is just you have a bunch of trees, and for each one, you're kind of randomly selecting a subset of features, and you can also use a bootstrap sample, which is when you're selecting not all of your data every time to use for each tree, but a subset with replacement. So each tree it'll have overlapping, but you're using maybe like for me, I used 80% each time for each tree. And using this, like you might wonder, why do this, not just do one tree? Ensembles can really help with overfitting. So that's we've talked about, which is when like your data is very, very closely fit to your training data and does not perform super well in your testing data. So at the end, you kind of combine the results from all the trees to get your final result. So my results so far, I used the random forest regressor, and you can see I had 100 estimators in my random forest. I already said I used 80% of the data each time, and I used 80% for training of my overall data set, 20% for testing. I ended up with an R-squared score of 0.61. The top 5 most important features, so if you're going to like change some things about your shop, these are, I guess, the things to change if you want to, that corresponded the most with the average review rate. So that was the number of shop favorites. So this can kind of be controlled by maybe like you can have a message to when you make a sale, like please favorite my shop. So then the next one was, does the shop have a refund policy? The number of shop listings tags. So that's basically just like you can have a number of descriptors for your different listings. So the more of those you have on your listings, that seems to correlate to higher reviews. And then the number of active listings. So this was just like the sheer number of things that you're selling. So that makes me think it might be beneficial as opposed to just having maybe like one listing that's allowed to be customized or something like that. You can instead offer maybe like 5 different listings of the different customizations, and that actually could contribute to you having a higher review. The length of the shop description. So this is just like, talking about your shop, maybe a little bit of the background. And so if that has more information, then that actually was also like correlated. So for next steps, I obviously want to try to improve that R-squared score a little bit. And I'm going to do that, I think, by throwing out, obviously you saw I had a ton of features. And as we know, like more features doesn't necessarily mean better results. And so I'm going to throw out some of like what I found to be the least important features and maybe instead try to replace them with some better information or just some different information. So there's a lot more stuff that I didn't use that I could be using, such as like information about the individual listings themselves for these shops. I think I only had a few metrics about the listings, so I'm going to look for more data on that. Obviously, I can get a larger data set. I had kind of a small data set. All right, well, that's about it. So please feel free to send me your questions and feedback. I have my email address right here. But you can also obviously message me on Canvas or message me on Teams. My name's Abigail Holloway. And then, yeah, I look forward to hearing your feedback.